When CNN President Jeff Zucker abruptly resigned earlier this month, people wondered if another shoe was going to drop. Zucker tied his exit to his failure to disclose a romantic relationship with his subordinate, Allison Gullist. But was there more to the story? That's what everybody around the story wondered. Well, a few days ago, Gullist also resigned, and now there are stories swirling about the reasons why. It seems the second shoe has landed. Multiple well-placed sources have told me this situation involves, quote, serious ethical violations. But Zucker and Gullist's reps have pushed back on that strongly. And CNN's parent, Warner Media, is not sharing specifics. So here's what we do know. We know that Zucker and Gullist were personally involved in CNN's coverage of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, while Cuomo's brother Chris was an anchor here. We know those brotherly interviews at the start of the pandemic were controversial. We know that later on, Chris helped Governor Cuomo and the governor's aides fend off sexual harassment allegations. We know that Zucker stayed loyal to Chris while critics called for the anchorman to be suspended. And we know that Zucker eventually did suspend and then fire Chris Cuomo in December. Zucker said he would not pay out the rest of Cuomo's contract. Cuomo's legal team then turned around and said, basically, why was he fired for ethical lapses if Zucker and Gullist were guilty of the same thing? And that's what caused a third-party law firm to ask lots and lots of questions, including about Gullist's interactions with the former governor and Zucker's relationship with Gullist. A lot came out through this third-party legal probe, and on Tuesday, Warner Media CEO Jason Kilar gave some specifics about it, saying in a memo, quote, based on interviews with more than 40 individuals and a review of over 100,000 texts and emails, the interview found violations of company policies, including CNN's news standards and practices by Jeff Zucker, Allison Gullist, and Chris Cuomo. News standards violated. That's a serious charge, but it's vague. What happened? Warner Media is not saying, but on Friday, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal both offered new and in some ways differing details. The Journal said Warner Media determined a statement that Gullist gave about her romantic relationship with Zucker was misleading, suggesting that it started before COVID, years ago. They basically said she misled CNN viewers. But Gullist's spokesperson doubled down on the timeline she presented and hinted that she might sue Warner. The Times story came out a few minutes later and offered a different explanation, suggesting the standards violation had to do with Gullist's communication with Governor Cuomo. She briefly worked for him before joining CNN, and she was, according to her own representative, the personal booker for Governor Cuomo during the early days of the pandemic. In one case, the Times said, the governor told Cuomo what he would like to be asked about on air. Then she passed along the topics, then replied to Cuomo and said, done. The investigators clearly reviewed many other emails too, but none of those have come out. Gullist's defense is that newsmakers tell shows what they want to talk about all the time, and that's true. It does not mean the hosts are going to ask about it or limit the interview to those topics. I think this next part's probably the most important. This weekend, I've spoken with multiple anchors who interviewed the governor here on CNN, and none of them saw signs of interference. This material about Gullist surprised them. But it is definitely unusual that the head of PR was involved in booking Cuomo and relaying information back and forth. Gullist's spokesperson says, quote, this was well known by the entire network. But that's not true. It came as a surprise to many staffers who read about it in the New York Times. And the fact that this is dripping out that way, it's dripping out through leaks, that adds to the frustration inside CNN. I've been pushing for more details about these violations. Other reporters have been pushing too. That's what reporters do. Who knows if any more information will come out. But the Journal story and the Times story, they don't necessarily conflict. This all may be of a piece. The answer to the question may be all of the above. And there's one piece of this that's indisputable. That's what Kilar wrote in his memo on Tuesday. He said, quote, we have the highest standards of journalistic integrity at CNN, and those rules must apply to everyone equally. That's the point. That's the principle. And according to the company, that's why two top CNN executives are out. Here to discuss this in detail now, Joe Paranen, a former president of Fox News, former vice president of CBS News, and an adjunct journalism professor at NYU. Also here, Mara Schiavocampo, former ABC and NBC correspondent, host of the Run Tell This podcast, and David Zerwick is back with us as well. Joe, you've been closest to a situation like this, running networks. Unpack it for us. After reading these statements this week, hearing about violations of news standards, and then reading these two different newspaper accounts, what do you think is going on here?
Well, the first thing is there's nothing more important to the brand and the credibility of the organization when you're in news, and you must do everything you can to maintain that credibility. In fact, all the news organizations have standards and practices, all the major news organizations. We at CBS, we at Fox even had them where you cannot even do anything that appears to be a conflict of interest. You are also to fully disclose anything that could be considered a conflict of interest to management. Let me back up by saying that Jeff Zucker was one of the best executive producers I've ever seen in the business. He was a hell of a competitor when he was at NBC and I was at CBS News. He really, I thought, was a great leader. And I don't know Allison at all, other than informally. But I would say that there were some mistakes made here for sure. Because if you adhere to the point that there can't even be a perception of a conflict of interest, you've made a mistake if you allow a relationship to continue, or you're trying to run a news organization. And also, if you're coordinating with a candidate or a governor or a president, and you're trying to allow information to pass through channels that are suspicious. And that would be, why would you go through a marketing person or a promotion person?
Well, they would say it's because she used to work for him, she knew him well, she was the best equipped to get the bookings that we needed. That would be the argument, right? That she's just using her connections to benefit CNN.
But doesn't that lead to a perception, possibly, that there could be a conflict where we're trying to help Cuomo out here? So I say avoid that, and that's what should have happened. So I think mistakes were made. And I don't know all the details.
Right.
But from what I do know, from what I do know, I think ultimately what has happened here was what's best for CNN.
Mara, we've been tracking this for months. You and I talked about this. The weekend Cuomo was fired. Chris Cuomo was fired.
So there have been, since the very beginning, there have been questions about whether there's more. Maybe we don't know the full story yet. And that is, in fact, what happened with Chris Cuomo. Initially, it seemed like there were these minor transgressions, and then it came out that there was a lot more to the story. So perhaps there's more here, too. As you noted, though, why is it coming out in these drips, in this leak form, and why is it just not fully presented to the staff at CNN and also to the public? So the question is were these fireable offenses, or were these minor technicalities that should have been handled in a different way?
Well, to your point, why is this all not being shared? Maybe for legal reasons, right? I was told by a source that Zucker can't comment further on the substance of why he left when he did and what happened. Maybe that's because of some legal agreement. Wouldn't that make sense, Joe, in a situation like this? Everybody's lawyered up. Chris Cuomo might sue. Cuomo's lawyer apparently wants tens of millions of dollars out of this network, so this is now a legal mess for CNN.
This is a legal mess for CNN, and absolutely, they want to be very careful about what they share, because everything that goes public ends up could be used in a lawsuit, and Cuomo's after $40 million or something like that. In terms of Allison, and in terms of sharing questions and all that, we don't know everything that was shared. We don't know what was said, what Cuomo, the governor, said to her. To avoid that, why have her in the process, knowing that she was working with him? Why even have her in the process? Why not have somebody deal directly, a producer instead, with Cuomo? Let me also add that we do have rules about interviews in all the major networks, and they do not allow you to share questions. They do not allow you to take any questions from the whoever the subject is. You can certainly mention the subject area. We're going to talk about Syria. We're going to talk about New York politics, but you cannot provide questions. That is a rule, because you want you don't want anything to damage potentially the quality of the interview.
Zura, question to you: how much damage has all of this, the Cuomo brothers, these resignations, how much damage has this done to CNN?
Yeah, that's my question. Looking at all the war coverage this week and the job CNN is doing, people risking their lives out there at the front lines, made me think back to CNN, all the way back to the Gulf War and all the great kinds of reporting it brings to the American public. And I really hope that this situation and the continued conversation about it, it's an important story, and it needs to be reported at the intensity it's being reported at, but I hope it doesn't wind up leaving CNN a badly damaged institution at this time when the merger is going through and there are all these other forces in play. This could damage CNN, and that is a real that would be a journalistic tragedy, I think, given the media ecosystem in which we now live and the few sources that bring us information worldwide that we can trust.
David, thank you. To the panel, everybody, please stick around. Much more in a moment.